The morning Eleanor Ashby handed the Duke of Wycliffe her notice, his daughter couldn't stop asking for the woman who smelled like lavender soap. But that was 2 weeks hence. On the cold March afternoon when everything changed, Eleanor was simply the housekeeper's assistant, 31 years old, brown hair always pinned tight, dove-gray uniform, the kind of face that disappeared against wallpaper. She'd worked at Wycliffe Manor for 7 years, managing linens and tallying stores, and in all that time, His Grace had spoken directly to her perhaps 3 times. She preferred it that way. Invisible was safe. The day began ordinarily. Eleanor inventoried preserves in the still room while rain drummed against stone. Through the narrow window, she could see the Wye running high and brown, swollen with spring melt. Beyond the kitchen garden, a flash of pink. Eleanor froze. Lady Catherine, the Duke's daughter, 5 years old, left motherless last autumn, stood at the river's edge in her nightdress and bare feet. No nurse, no governess, just a small figure swaying in the wind, one hand reaching toward the churning water. Eleanor didn't think. She ran. Across the garden, her boots slipping on wet flagstones. The child was leaning forward now, fascinated by something in the current. Eleanor's lungs burned. 20 yards. 10. Lady Catherine's foot slipped on the muddy bank. Eleanor caught her just as she fell, both of them tumbling into the shallows. The cold was a fist closing around her ribs. She dragged the child up, clutching her against her chest as the current tried to pull them both downstream. Her boot found purchase on a submerged root. She hauled them onto the bank, coughing, shaking, the child's nightdress plastered to her tiny frame. Lady Catherine looked up with enormous gray eyes, her father's eyes, and touched Eleanor's wet face with one small hand. "The boat," she whispered. "I wanted the boat." A toy sailboat spun past in the current, already 20 yards downstream. Eleanor wrapped her cloak around the shivering child and carried her toward the manor at a run. No one saw them enter through the servant's door. Eleanor brought Lady Catherine directly to the nursery, stripped off the wet nightdress, dried her with rough efficiency, and dressed her in fresh linen. The child submitted quietly, her eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "Don't tell Papa," Lady Catherine said as Eleanor combed her damp curls. "He'll be angry. He should know you were in danger. He's always angry now, since Mama died." The child's voice went small. "I don't want him to send me away." Something in Eleanor's chest constricted. She cupped the child's face gently. "You won't be sent away, but someone must watch you better than this." She found the governess, Miss Hartwell, asleep in the schoolroom, a novel fallen open on her lap. Eleanor woke her with a sharp word, explained nothing, and returned to the still room to change her own soaked dress before anyone noticed. She told no one. What would she say? That the governess was negligent? That a duke's daughter nearly drowned while the household went about its tasks? Eleanor was a housekeeper's assistant. Her observations were worth nothing. By evening, she'd convinced herself it was handled. Lady Catherine was safe. The governess had been warned. It would not happen again. She was counting silver in the butler's pantry when she heard His Grace's voice in the corridor, sharp, cold, speaking to Mrs. Bellamy, the housekeeper. "She'll be dismissed tonight. Pack her things." Eleanor's hands stilled on the spoons. "Your Grace, if I may. Eleanor's worked here 7 years without incident. 7 years of mediocrity. I've reviewed the household accounts. There are discrepancies in the preserves inventory. The linen orders are excessive, and I'm told she was found this afternoon dripping wet in the nursery wing with no explanation. I won't tolerate slovenly behavior." Eleanor's breath stopped. Someone had seen her, reported her, and now, she's being blamed for things beyond her control, Mrs. Bellamy said carefully. "The linen orders were my decision. The preserves are her responsibility, as is maintaining appropriate boundaries. I will not have servants wandering where they please, disturbing my daughter's routine." His voice could have frozen glass. "She leaves tonight. That's final." Footsteps retreated. Mrs. Bellamy appeared in the pantry doorway, her face gray. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I tried." Eleanor's hands trembled on the silver. "What discrepancies?" "There are none. He's looking for reasons." Mrs. Bellamy's mouth thinned. "Miss Hartwell claimed you disrupted the schoolroom this afternoon, frightened Lady Catherine by appearing soaked and wild-eyed. She suggested you were unstable." The governess, covering her own negligence by attacking the servant who discovered it. Eleanor set down the spoons with careful precision. I see. If you explain what happened, His Grace has made his decision. Eleanor's voice came out steady, revealing nothing. I'll be gone within the hour. She packed in the small room she shared with 2 chambermaids, 1 spare dress, her mother's Bible, the £4 she'd saved in 7 years. Through the narrow window, the river ran dark and high. Lady Catherine was safe. That was what mattered. Eleanor Ashby left Wycliffe Manor as she'd arrived, unnoticed, unremarked, a shadow passing through firelight. Behind her, a child pressed her face to the nursery window and watched the only person who'd seen her disappear into the dark. The Duke of Wycliffe discovered his mistake on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after Eleanor's dismissal, when his daughter stopped speaking. Lady Catherine sat at breakfast in the nursery, her porridge untouched, staring at nothing. When Miss Hartwell addressed her, she didn't respond. When her father visited before departing for London, she turned her face to the wall. She's been like this since Sunday, Miss Hartwell said, her voice tight with nerves. I cannot account for it, Your Grace. Perhaps she's the Duke, Sebastian Grenville, 36 years old, widowed and drowning in responsibilities he'd never wanted, looked at his daughter's small, silent form and felt helpless fury rise in his chest. Everything he touched turned brittle. His wife, dead from childbed fever with their stillborn son. His estate, hemorrhaging money from his father's poor investments. And now his daughter, unreachable. Send for the physician. The physician found nothing wrong. Lady Catherine's body was sound. But she wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, wouldn't sleep. She only stood at the nursery window, scanning the grounds with those enormous gray eyes. On the 4th day, the Duke cancelled his London trip and sat in the nursery himself, watching his daughter watch the window. Catherine, he said quietly, what are you looking for? For the first time in days, she looked at him. Her voice came out rusty with disuse. Lavender. What? The lady who smells like lavender soap. Where did she go? The Duke's mind spun uselessly. The governess uses rosewater, darling. Perhaps, not Miss Hartwell. Catherine's chin trembled. The lady with brown hair. She wore gray. She saved me from the river, and then she vanished, like Mama. Something cold slid down the Duke's spine. What river? Catherine, went, last week. I fell, and she pulled me out. She was soaked and shaking, but she didn't scold. She just made me warm again. Tears spilled down the child's cheeks. I told her not to tell you because you'd be angry, but she told anyway, didn't she? And you sent her away like you sent Mama away. I didn't send your mother anywhere, Catherine. She died. You were angry at her too. I heard you shouting the night before she got sick. Everyone you're angry at goes away. The child's voice broke. I want the lavender lady back. The Duke sat very still. A servant. Brown hair, gray dress. Someone who'd been in the nursery soaked to the bone. Someone he'd dismissed for that exact transgression without asking why. His daughter had nearly drowned, been saved, and he'd fired her rescuer. He found Mrs. Bellamy in the housekeeper's room, her mouth pressed thin. The woman I dismissed Sunday. The one found wet in the nursery wing. Eleanor Ashby, Your Grace. My daughter says she saved her from the river. Mrs. Bellamy's expression didn't change, but something blazed behind her eyes. Eleanor never mentioned it. But yes, Your Grace. I believe she did. Lady Catherine was brought to the nursery dry and safe. Eleanor was soaked and scratched from climbing the riverbank. She said nothing to defend herself when you ordered her dismissed. Why not? Because defending herself would mean revealing Miss Hartwell's negligence. Eleanor chose to protect her daughter's governess rather than herself. The Duke felt sick. Where is she now? I don't know, Your Grace. She has an aunt in Derbyshire, a Mrs. Shaw, but no certain employment. She left with £4 and a letter of reference I wrote despite your orders. £4. 7 years of service, and she'd walked away with £4 and his daughter's heart. Find her, he said. Send riders to every coaching inn between here and Derbyshire. I don't care what it costs. Mrs. Bellamy allowed herself the smallest smile. Yes, Your Grace. They found Eleanor 6 days later in a village 15 miles north, working in a tavern kitchen to earn her coach fare. The Duke rode out himself, leaving before dawn, and arrived at the Modest Inn just as the supper rush ended. She was washing dishes in a stone sink, her hands red from lye soap, her brown hair escaping its pins. She wore a rough linen dress and looked desperately tired. When the innkeeper told her a gentleman waited in the private parlor, she dried her hands without expression and followed. The Duke stood when she entered. She curtsied, that minimal, precise gesture, and stood silent. "Miss Ashby, Your Grace." Her voice was perfectly empty. It made him furious, not at her, at himself, at the situation he'd created through arrogance and haste. "My daughter told me what you did. Lady Catherine is well, I hope? She hasn't spoken or eaten properly in a week. She thinks I sent you away as punishment. She thinks everyone she cares for disappears." Eleanor's composure cracked for just an instant. A flash of pain quickly suppressed. "I'm sorry to hear it. She's asking for you. Specifically, the lady who smells like lavender soap." He paused. "I dismissed you for saving my daughter's life. I didn't ask questions. I didn't think. I simply acted. You acted on the information you had, Your Grace. Miss Hartwell told you I disrupted the schoolroom. Technically, I did. Miss Hartwell is dismissed. She fell asleep while my 5-year-old daughter wandered unsupervised to a flooding river. You pulled Catherine from the water, dried her, dressed her, and said nothing to defend yourself when I blamed you for the very negligence you'd prevented." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "What would you have had me do? Accuse the governess? Report her to you? I'm a housekeeper's assistant, Your Grace. My word against a governess means nothing. Your word should have meant everything. You saved my child. Children fall into rivers. Servants pull them out. It's not heroic. It's necessary." The Duke crossed to where she stood, exhausted and proud, and refusing to bend. "Come back." "No. Lady Catherine needs consistency and safety. I can provide neither. You'll hire another governess, a better one this time, and your daughter will heal. She wants you. She wants her mother. I remind her of safety at a moment when everything else is dangerous. It's not about me specifically, Your Grace. It's about someone seeing her. Then come back and keep seeing her." His voice roughened. "Let me pay you properly. Not as a housekeeper's assistant, as Catherine's companion. Private rooms. Real wages. Authority over her care." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "You'll be angry again someday. At the household, at me, at something I do or fail to do. And I'll be dismissed again, and Lady Catherine will lose someone else. I won't do that to her. Then what would you have me offer that you can't refuse?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Nothing, Your Grace. Because there's nothing you can offer that you can't also take away." The Duke of Wycliffe returned to his estate alone, Eleanor's refusal sitting like lead in his chest. He found his daughter in the nursery window seat, exactly where he'd left her. When he entered, Catherine turned with desperate hope that died when she saw his empty hands. "You didn't bring her back?" I asked. She refused. "Because you were cruel to her." It wasn't a question. Catherine turned back to the window. "Everyone knows you're cruel now, Papa. You weren't before Mama died. Now you're angry all the time and people leave." The truth of it struck like a blow. Sebastian sat heavily on the edge of the window seat. His daughter didn't look at him. "You're right," he said quietly. "I have been cruel and angry, and I've handled everything badly since your mother passed." Silence. "I blamed your mother for dying," he continued. "Blamed the physician for not saving her. Blamed myself for not being enough to make her want to stay. And then I blamed everyone else because it was easier than admitting I was lost." Catherine's small shoulders began to shake. "I'm sorry, darling. I'm sorry I sent away the person who saved you. I'm sorry I've been so angry you felt you couldn't tell me you'd been in danger. Most of all, I'm sorry I've made you feel like caring for people means losing them." His daughter turned and launched herself into his arms, sobbing against his chest. Sebastian held her, this fierce, frightened child he'd failed so thoroughly, and let himself cry too. When the storm passed, Catherine pulled back and wiped her eyes. "Can we bring her back together?" She said, "No, sweetheart. She's afraid I'll dismiss her again if I become angry." Catherine's jaw set with familiar stubbornness. Her mother's expression, exactly. "Then we have to promise we won't. Both of us. Forever. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Catherine climbed down from the window seat and found her mother's writing desk. She pulled out paper and a pencil, her hand moving carefully. "We write it down. A real promise. And we both sign it. Then she'll know we mean it." Sebastian watched his daughter work with meticulous focus, her tongue between her teeth, her letters wobbly but determined. When she finished, she handed him the paper. "We promise Miss Eleanor can stay forever, and Papa won't be angry and send her away." She is family now. Below, space for 2 signatures. This is very serious, Catherine. If I sign this, I'm bound by it. I cannot dismiss Miss Eleanor for any reason, even if she makes mistakes or disagrees with me. Good. Sign it. You understand what you're asking? You're giving a servant authority in our home that even I won't be able to override. She's not a servant, Papa. She's the person who jumped in a freezing river to save me when no one else was watching. If that doesn't make her family, I don't know what does. Sebastian looked at his daughter, this small, clear-eyed judge of character, and signed his name below hers. They rode out together the next morning, arriving at the tavern before dawn. The innkeeper was reluctant to wake his kitchen maid, but Catherine's pleading expression and the Duke's purse overcame objections. Eleanor appeared in her rough linen dress, her face composed but wary. She curtsied to Sebastian, then saw Catherine, and went very still. The child ran to her, wrapped both arms around her waist, and pressed her face against Eleanor's apron. Please come back. We need you. I need you. Eleanor's hands hovered uncertainly before settling on Catherine's shoulders. She looked at Sebastian over his daughter's head. Your Grace, we've brought a contract, Catherine announced, pulling back. She thrust the paper at Eleanor. Read it. We both sighed. Eleanor read slowly. Her mouth trembled. Lady Catherine, this isn't. I'm not family. You saved my life and asked nothing for it. You let yourself be dismissed rather than cause trouble. You're the only person who sees me, really sees me, not just the Duke's sad daughter. Catherine's voice shook. If that's not family, then family doesn't mean anything. Eleanor looked at the paper, at the child's careful letters, at the Duke's bold signature below. When she raised her eyes to Sebastian's, they were bright with unshed tears. If I make a mistake, then we'll handle it together, Sebastian said. As family does. Not with dismissal or blame, but with honesty. You'll have authority over Catherine's care and education. Private rooms. £50 per annum. And this promise, signed and witnessed, that your place here is permanent. Why? Eleanor's voice came out barely audible. Why would you bind yourself like this for someone you overlooked for 7 years? Because my daughter is wiser than I am. Because you jumped into a flooding river without hesitation while I sat in my study counting problems, instead of seeing the person who'd already solved them. He paused. Because I've spent 7 years not seeing you, and I'd like the chance to do better. Eleanor looked down at Catherine, who gripped her hand with fierce hope. I don't know how to be family, Eleanor whispered. Neither do we, Catherine said simply. We can learn together. Eleanor folded the contract carefully and pressed it against her heart. Then yes, I'll come back. Catherine's whoop of joy echoed through the tavern. / Eleanor Ashby became companion, governess, and eventually something far more complicated to the Duke of Wycliffe's household. She moved into the East Wing rooms with morning light and space to breathe. She taught Catherine mathematics and natural history, took her on long walks by the river, and filled the manor with the quiet competence that had always been her gift. The Duke learned to see her, truly see her. The way she calmed Catherine's nightmares. The small improvements she made to household management that saved hundreds of pounds. The precise, understated grace with which she moved through the world. 18 months later, on a morning bright with summer, he found her in the garden reading to Catherine and realized he'd been falling in love so gradually he'd missed the moment it became inevitable. He proposed in the still room where she'd first worked, with Catherine as witness and conspirator. Eleanor wore a dress the color of lavender, and said yes to the Duke, who had finally learned to see past his own anger to the woman who'd been there all along. They married quietly. Catherine stood beside them holding both their hands. The contract remained framed in Eleanor's study, a child's wobbly promise that had saved them all.